So here with Sacha Stone at Villa AKASHA, and thrilled that we could actually take the time to get connected and take this time. And I'm really excited to be hearing a bit about your story, of course, from Africa originally, and the war, and there was so much going on at that time. And then through being a rock star, and now looking at this, really what it takes for people to live an extraordinary life in terms of being in their own power, in their own sovereignty, and being able to live on their own terms. We've got like free energy projects, we've got community building, you've got biodomes and pods. I mean, there's just so much that I'm looking forward to really hearing about. Thanks so much for taking the time.
Great pleasure, thank you. I'm not so sure about the rock star bit, more of a disaster, as I said earlier. But nonetheless, I mean, that was certainly good breeding for engaging the business of being a sovereign human. Now, rock and roll is always a good, up yours to the establishment. It was a nice way of sort of segueing into a conscious and sovereign existence. So that for me is the pedigree I've got, is rock and roll.
Let's start with that. We'll come back to rock and roll, but start with sovereignty, because that's such an interesting concept. And we get this idea that, well, I'm me and you're you, and we're two separate individuals, but then somehow we're all one, and that's very interesting. And then I can choose what I want to do, but then I've got rules and authorities and governments, and there's all this. What's going on?
You've got whatever you perceive to be real. So if you place your attention on something, invest it with attention, with life force, and you establish it then, or manifest as being, and you give it credence. But similarly, if you withdraw your attention from that thing, you disempower it. So ultimately, sovereignty is about you determining and understanding that you are the arbiter of the truth between the thing that stands between truth and fiction. And once you understand that you are the arbiter of that which is real and organic, as opposed to that which is fictitious and steeped in false light, there you've just engaged the flame of sovereignty. Because sovereignty is to say, I am the determiner of this field of expression, and I want to manifest a life worth living. And I don't want to offer my babies up to sacrifice to the crown or to the state and register my, my knickers, and register my bicycle and register my children. I want to step outside of that proverbial matrix and engage an organic, sentient, conscious, expansive life. And once you've made that determination, and you've made that internal, you've switched on the internal recognition that that's all you ever needed to do, was to make that determination. The rest becomes relatively easy. The difficulty is always in engaging that hair trigger and stepping beyond your fear and your so-called comfort zone, because most people are indentured into a false light reality inside the comfort of some kind of suburban pedestrian matrix, which leads them falsely to believe that they are comfortable and secure and everything is going to be fine. Of course it isn't. It's just a perfect form of enslavement. You're having a tea party inside a prison cell and pretending that you're liberated. So there's a huge distinction between hitting that internal switch and recognizing yourself to be not just sovereign, but the thing that thereby manifests a life worth living. Because you can have all sorts of people in the streets claiming their sovereignty and throwing rocks at the citadel, but that is not a creative existence. It's not expansive, it's not conscious either, it's just angry. So what we don't want to do here, within what we are offering and what we are collectively envisioning, we don't want to bring about revolution for the sake of breaking windows and punishing the establishment. We're less concerned with punishing the establishment as we are in empowering righteous action into manifestation.
Beautiful.
Without being too sanctimonious about it, I should add, because there's nothing worse to my mind than spiritual sanctimony coming along with sovereignty. Because it can also trip you up quite horribly.
So is it, when we talk about sovereignty as, what you've just said, talking about sovereignty as that determination that I get to choose, essentially, and whether I choose to be part of a system that is using my energy, and I can have a tea party in that prison and pretend that I'm free, or I can step outside of that and do something else. And, we're all creating all of this, and what we put our energy and our attention on is what shows up. And there's a whole bunch of other people on this spaceship with us who are all putting their energy and attention into what they're told to put it into. And is it really that simple just for me as an individual, as a man to go, this is what I'm putting my energy on and that's what I'm going to have in my world? Because there's all these other...
It's desperately simple. It's desperately simple. And it is empowered all the more if you have the capacity to engage the empathic waveform of the human heart. So if you're able to engage with a bureaucrat or a technocrat or some idiot in a uniform who is threatening to bludgeon you to death because you've stepped over some statutory line, to be able to engage with that individual with a degree of empathy, and dare I say it, love, is where all the power exists for you to transform or transmute an otherwise negative or dangerous situation into an empowering and beautiful one, and one that serves pure truth. I've had this myself in giving instructionals to groups of police on the side of the street. One time I was pulled over in I think it was The Hague in Holland by squad cars and sirens blazing late at night, thinking I was some drug baron, because my car is quite an expensive car and I was going quite fast that night. And they pulled me over, and they had like 8 or 9 police and a detective, and they were quite certain that once they'd searched the car and seen this long-haired lout riding, they were going to find the stash. And I ended up, of course, I refused to open the car to them. I just let the window down, yay high, and engaged them through the window. And I wasn't remotely fazed by what was going on. And eventually I said, look, I'll because I love you guys and I want to instruct you, I'm going to open the car door so that we can sit on the grass and talk about this. And we ended up quite literally with these guys lying on the bonnet of the car with me, giving them an instructional on sovereignty and law, and explaining to them how they were violating every natural law and hiding behind the fiction of a uniform and a badge, thereby contravening their conscience and so on. And they loved it. They were fascinated. They lapped it up. What I learned that particular occasion was that when one goes into a situation like that fearlessly and just seeking to raise the questions in the sort of Socratic tradition of slowly going through every single issue in front of you, you engage a very beautiful flame of dialogue and of engagement, consciousness, dare I say. And that's what happened on that occasion. Other occasions I've been pulled over by the police and I've said no contract. I've lowered the window 2 inches and just say there is no contract. How far do you want to perpetrate this travesty of natural law, and do you really want me to pick up a stick and beat you with it tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock once you release me from a prison cell? Because believe you me, I'll come after you, the living man hiding behind the badge, not the police officer. Not the costume, the living man. So there's ways and ways. And in that particular instance that I'm referring to now is in Knightsbridge in London, the sort of Holy of Holies. And the police who pulled me over at 2 o'clock in the morning completely got it and waved me on.
Wow.
And because I said, do you have any lawful standing in asking me to step outside of my vehicle? Give me the law now. Give me the goddamn law. I'm busy and I'm tired. It's 2 o'clock in the morning. And I'm in no mood to negotiate a law. And that was the right thing to say in that occasion. Now, if I were to say that in downtown Freetown in Sierra Leone, I might get a baton over the head. I don't know. Find out.
Find out.
But the point is to engage with these questions with a sense of love, empathy, and engagement, and not going out with hostility and aggression, because that begets hostility and aggression. Always.
I've had that experience. And the same thing, rolled the window down 2 inches and said the same words, but there's a different intention there. There's a hostility and an aggression, and then next thing I'm getting hauled off, and I'm going, okay, so we've played that game, and I'm going, that didn't work out so well. How can we do this differently? And beautiful to have that contrast.
Actually, I've never had a problem with police. In all my engagements, they've been diffused. I think my mum taught me how to engage things with more of a pacific attitude when I was young. So I've never had that kind of boo, sucks, I'm going to, rage against the machine. I despise the machine more than any man alive. But I also know that's no way to transmute it.
Tell me about Mum and Sierra Leone and early days. Because this is, the man that you've become and the work that you're doing is such power in that. Where's that come from?
Well, it's the collective
What do you put it
meme,
down
isn't
to?
it? It's the collective meme, and it's just being able to read and surf that awakening.
Yeah.
That's the reason why you're sat here, why we're all in this room, is because through the laws of resonance, each one of us here have been drawn to this conversation. So I may be speaking right now, but we're all involved in this conversation. We're all cohering the flame of pure truth in the pure inquiry of who am I? And what are we doing, and where are we going, and what change can I affect in this veil of tears? And so that's what we're variously exploring, are we not, in this conversation?
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely.
So that what
So-
brings me here is
Yeah.
an understanding of that collective unfoldment, and I've never been afraid to chox away and to surf that wave,
Beautiful.
even when it was. Years ago, when it was really renting the fabric of my own life and so-called career, and so all of that, and to be able to slash and burn all in my own life that was composed of false light, of idolatry, that was the whole rock and roll thing, which was really about lionizing and idolizing false values. Not that I was doing it, but the world of music and rock and roll is the science of idolatry writ in technicolor on the world stage.
Yeah.
And there was a given threshold that I arrived at personally where literally, physically, I thought I'm going to die if I continue putting myself into that flame. I'm so out of coherence with getting on a stage and strumming a guitar badly and howling like a banshee. And yes, I was good at what I was doing, and my band were world class, and we were really ace, and we had good product, man.
Yeah.
All of that notwithstanding, the effect that it was having on my cellular system was visceral. I mean, I was having all sorts of health problems occur because I was putting myself into a space-time vector that was not coherent to my own consciousness unfoldment. And the moment I laid down the rock and roll paraphernalia and went to North Africa and the Middle East and started to live in the desert there and connect with this greater vision of humanitad and how I wanted to engage this peace and brokerage and diplomacy and start to learn the language of humanity and begin to assemble the alphabet of humanity and go and meet with warlords and political leaders and religious leaders, which I did for many years, and I still continue to do that, but I did it very intensively in those days. And I was doing it in order to assemble the alphabet of the human heart that I desperately wanted to find, having grown up in a war myself as a kid. And I ultimately did discover what that alphabet, or what that commonality was. And the NewEarth Nation, I don't lay any claim to that myself, but my part in the NewEarth Nation and in the ignition of the NewEarth Nation is very much connected to that, quanta, to that assimilation, whole systems assimilation of the alphabet of the human heart, insofar as I was able to go forth into the world and with pure inquiry in my heart, real curiosity, and a lot of innocence in those days, for sure, because we're talking, about 20 odd years ago, and I was very innocent in those days. But it worked, because what I managed to learn and assimilate and aggregate at that time was the most beautiful symphony of diversity. I met with the great imams and sheikhs of Islam and terrorist cells and so-called warlords and people who were supposed to be the big scary characters, also in Buddhism and in the Christian faith. The Jewish faith sort of threw me out every time. I could never get a look in talking to any rabbis or anyone in the Jewish sector there. It wanted nothing to do with the humanitarian approach.
Wow.
Yeah, and there's something to be said for that as well, when one understands the macro politic of the planet and how that's also been engineered largely by subterfuge within the Jewish faith. That's a subject which we ought not to go into today, but for sure it's it is a source code, a diabolical source code in the social political matrix.
The bit that strikes me out of all of that is how many people right now are having issues in their body, at a cellular level, and their bodies are screaming out to them, this work that you're doing, what you're giving your life energy to, doesn't resonate. It's not the thing for you to be doing. There's something else. And people are hanging on to their careers or their jobs or their, all this stuff that is so important and going, but I have to, this is who I am, and they've got all this stuff. And then it's like to even be able to consider something else, the terror that evokes, which isn't actually terror. It's the thing that's going to set them free.
Yes,
and the thing that set you on this whole journey.
Yeah.
What do we say to someone who's in that place, who's like, you know what I mean?
I know the question, and I'll give you the answer that you least want to hear, because you ought not to say anything to that person, is the answer.
Of course, yeah.
Because there is no teaching. There is empathy, there is resonance, there is invocation, there is inspiration. So one can inspire change. One can invoke sort of hyperdimensional harmonics and patterns of perfection into the world by standing in truth, and by planting a beautiful garden, and by fostering that garden with right action and with close attention. One can begin to manifest and anchor those patterns of perfection into this temporal world. But the process of going and educating and teaching others is a nonsense, and in point of fact is probably the single biggest impediment we've got toward the noosphere, or the actualization of the planetary consciousness, is being inhibited by so many well-wishers and do-gooders seeking to, rather than fully resolve their own unresolved aspects of self, i.e. shadow, seek to project into the world problems onto others, and then seek to mend and help others. And so that whole kind of nanny culture, that nanny civilizational complex, that the social, the collectivist memes came off that, and social services comes off that, and the whole thing that the government's looking after you, and Big Brother's taking care of you, and the priest will absolve you, and the doctor will heal you, and the lawyer will protect you. All that crap is a function, is a necessary blowback of that foundational absence of sovereign expression, whereupon you take absolute responsibility for self and actualization of self. You do not presume to educate your children or anyone else until you have become enlightened. And that's oftentimes not in this lifetime. Sure. But what we seek to do before that is to go forth and contaminate and pollute one another, and buy and sell illusions. Because that's what most of us are doing to one another, is trading illusions. And the greater illusion tends to win. The snake oil, the strongest snake oil tends to be the one that wins the day. And that is a sad indictment, again, of the absence of collective consciousness. So I would suggest that the person who most needs the help that you're referring to needs to learn from assimilation, needs to learn from being inspired. So where you and I step fully into our idiom, into our truth, and then fully actualize and grow that beautiful, bounteous garden of expression around your actualized self, that becomes the magnet. That becomes the thing that others are attracted to and will learn by wordlessly, and that's the key. Sorry, you're the interviewer.
Beautiful. Go for it, man.
Wordless expression is always more powerful, because that's how empathy carries. And that transcendence does not occur through a manual.
Yeah, exactly. And there's such a, we've got such a culture. I mean, my background is working with authors, speakers, coaches, mentors, gurus, who are here to teach you and help you and guide you and support you into, and it's like, there's part of it was fantastic. They're doing all this great work. This part of it was all bullshit. And you're going, well, just... Oof.
So you see, the distinction is this. Teach or speak to truth when it is asked of you. I answer these questions very openly and very as honorably as I can, and very happy happy to do so, because the inquiry is pure, and my answers are that which I know to be true.
Sure.
You won't hear speculative answers from me. You won't hear second-hand reports from me, or law of first report being repeated, because I have no interest in that nonsense. But what I don't want to do is go and prognosticate to others. So to go forth and educate for me is a no-no. But unless people are asking the question, whereupon the answer is
So
valid.
we learn not to coach our family, right?
Kind of thing. And if we are to engage in the business of so-called education, we should do it, as I keep saying whenever I'm asked the question, we should do it in the arcane tradition in Africa we call it Indaba, my children. I've spoken about this a few times, where you sit in a circle beneath a tree on the ground and you tell stories. And through the telling of stories, whether they are apocryphal stories, whether they are metaphorical stories, whether they are real stories that happen to us, they are all valuable. And those stories are real exchange, and where we can truly not just learn in a linear sense, but become enchanted in the quantum sense. And that, my friend, is where children and adults engage consciousness and engage bliss and engage delight. And delight is not a word to be underestimated. The importance of finding delight in your life and in your world.
Delight. Yeah, I've certainly had the joy of that. In my as a young guy growing up, you kind of know everything, right? And I thought that my job was going to be to educate my children. Oh my God. I'm going to mentor them, I'm going to show them, and for sure we've got a responsibility to offer some protection and some provisions. But man, the mentors, when they arrived, I had identical twin girls. And I think if I had have just had one at a time, I would have gone, well, this child is the product of my wife and I, and the society and the upbringing.
You had it in stereo.
But we had this perfect carbon copy, and they're like genetically identical, but they're not the same. Wow, what's going on? It was such a trip. And when we realized, that they were complete, that they had it all when they arrived, we didn't have to teach anything, or it just changed everything. It was huge.
It's beautiful to hear that from you. And of course, in teaching, we immediately inhibit. Whereas if we didn't teach anything to kids at the first 3, 4, 5, even up to 7 years of age, what we could learn from them, because these kids, these souls are more recently connected to the vibral quantum source, and they can bring stories to us if we were able to hear them. Yeah.
I'd love to hear about the alphabet of the human heart. I'd also love to hear about, there's been about 50 other things that you've mentioned since then, but can we go back to that one?
Sure.
And hear a bit more about that? Because that sounds fascinating.
Sure. Well, the commonality of the human heart, as I understood it, is the desire to love and be loved. And that's why that came down in my own language, and the vernacular that I choose is I always speak about the ultimate currency of exchange, and the ultimate value and the measure of value is our capacity to love and be loved. Wow. No more, no less. And if that became the signature of our civilizational holonomic reality, then everything that issued off that would be imbued with its perfection and would be in its immanent, immortal blueprint. Wow. And it's as simple as recognizing that is the foundation to our reality. Having said that, you've got a lot of different cosmogenetic stories which are interwoven into the simple human precondition of loving and being loved. You also have diabolical, Jesuitical, and even non-terrestrial agendas, lower astral intervention, so-called demonic intelligences, which interpose themselves variously onto our individual and collective story. And those voices and intelligences make themselves heard. So where there is the lack or the absence of conscious expression or of a sovereign expression, then you have walk-in or takeover or possession. And then the voice and the action that issues from that individual or that group in a football stadium or in a riot situation on the street or in some gang rape situation, which happens all the time.
Or in the boardroom.
Yeah, or in the boardroom. There's a
legislation
hooliganism. Yeah, or in a courtroom.
Yeah.
Whether it's individual or collective, you can have a diabolical takeover of an intelligence that imposes itself or an elemental cloud intelligence that imposes itself in a space-time where it is coherent. So again, it comes down to laws of attraction, and that's why a bunch of guys hanging out and using foul language and look at the tits on that. That is a dangerous predisposition, because that immediately invites an even deeper, darker narrative to unfold at the collective level, and ultimately that does end up if you take military. The way in which military, the science of militarism, and the way that they put squaddies together and they bring them into these little cultures of your brother, your buddy, and you've got to save his life. And you all follow the orders. It's pretty diabolical. That's the science and the art of how to create these lockdown collectives which respond instantaneously at a visceral, aggressive response level to a given situation and then kill. So one bullet flies to this little group and they all open up their machine guns, move in and devastate an entire Afghan village because one sniper sent a bullet saying, please stay away. You know, I mean, these things are happening every minute of every day. And it's connected to elemental cloud intelligence taking over the abnegated sovereignty or consciousness of individuals and collectives, even worse.
Maybe a bit of an overview of your understanding of the human story, the history, because there's his story, right, that we read in the textbooks and we got taught at school. And I think most of our audience have kind of clued on to that that's probably not the whole story. And then we've got lots of different, stories. And I've heard you kind of mention a few things. I'm super curious. I reckon we've got time to kind of have an overview of that.
Time is never the issue. I mean, just to...
Do we have willingness?
Always. But just to resolve that group collective meme I was talking to, it takes one individual within that collective who is in resonance with their own consciousness or their own conscience or their own heart wave to be able to go, Guy, I'm not playing this game. That dissolves the rest of the collective almost instantly. Wow. So the power of one over the many is absolute. This is what pure truth teaches us. So to answer your question, the alphabet of the human heart taught me that I am sovereign, me. Whereas I was going out meeting with hundreds, thousands of powerful people in all different modalities and trying to assimilate and understand the myth of power as it interposes itself upon the human family, in politics, in religion, in blah, blah, blah. What I ultimately got to was that the alphabet of the human heart is nested absolutely within self, me, here, now. And then I began a process of conscious actualization, taking on a responsibility for the alpha and the omega. And when you do that and genuinely begin to empathize with all that is, then you seem to engage a connectivity. An umbilical highway opens up to the super soul, and you then more or less have access to a quantum mind or brain, the universal brain, and then you're able to begin the process of manifesting stuff in this world. Well, that's my process in any event, and I'm only prepared to speak to my process, no one else's.
Sure.
Because that's proven out more or less in little ways here and there.
Yep. So,
I can happily speak to how the process of recognizing that one is ultimately the sovereign.
Let's hear about that.
And that my determination will manifest a life worth living. You take that to its next iteration or its next expression, and you look around you and go, well, where do I want to be? Where do I want to place myself? Go to that place. Place yourself there. Physically place yourself there. Put a spade in the ground and begin that process. It really doesn't matter where you are. You could be in the middle of the Maghreb desert and you can build a food forest. You can create any kind of environment. We know now that you can even create a microclimate based on how you engage blooming the desert. So all of those bizarre, somewhat esoteric methodologies are now available to us, to anyone. So you can pretty much choose where you want to be. But you have to have the courage to go there and plant those seeds. Too many people are still staying in their high-rise apartment or in their, and are saying, well, I'll make the move once I've done X, Y, and Z. But you see, it never happens that way. And X, Y, and Z never arrives. And then you reach the age of X and you go, fuck it, I've lost my window,
Too late
you know.
now, yeah.
Now the kids are at university and there's mortgage, whatever. So what I'm getting at is that if you don't actualize, and by actualization, I'm saying actualization means conscious action. It means we're all conscious, more or less. But how many of us act on that consciousness in a dynamic sense, in a way that then manifests a new reality? That's the huge challenge. And what I discovered was that it's actually the simplest thing of all, to just do it. Just do it. And defy all boundaries.
So why do people do that?
They don't do it because they are drunk on the artifice of an imposed false reality matrix, which is informed by academia, by media, by entertainment, and by your own familial and social and societal complex, which locks you into a predisposition from which you are not meant to move. Because you have been designated, you have been monetized, and you have been given a nested position in the social order of things. So you will be stacking shelves for the next 40 years. You might make it to floor manager and get, an extra $50 a week on your pension. But you will only ever get to drive such and such a vehicle. You'll only ever get to afford such and such a shitty house in such and such a shitty neighborhood. But you might get away with not dying from cancer before the age of 73.
Hooray.
So don't complain too much. Oh, and go to church and pray a lot.
Yeah.
Okay, because that might just see you through. So that's a classic predisposition of an entrapment, which you were socially engineered into that. And to break away from your social engineering is where the actualization thing comes in. Now, the moment you do it, and you know that because you've done it, which is why you're here, as has she, as has he, as have I. And actually, Ubud, Bali, is one of those classic places where, say what you like about the hippie community here, 90% of the people here, if not more, have actualized sufficiently to be able to check out, get on a plane, check in. To a place which is brimming with color and with telluric energies from the inner earth and dielectric forces going on and volcanoes and earthquakes and waterfalls and this primordial kind of elemental soup of Bali. Places like Bali are very, very welcoming to those of us who are checking out of the linear grid system and want to animate and need those elements of fire and water to reanimate ourselves.
The connection with earth
Sure,
and nature.
that's why we're here.
Just plug in.
Yeah.
So what's the benefit to someone who actually does that, and someone who's looking at it going, whoa, it looks scary, but they're feeling that call? Why would they want to do that? Why not just stay in the family, stay in the church, stay in the job, stay in the suburbs, stay in the city, the supermarkets and the superhighways, and everything's taken care of, and you'll be okay, and one day you'll die.
Because one is a false light reality, which is entropic, life depleting, where you simply end up shrinking into grayness until you drop off your perch. And the other one is life affirmative, is abundant, prosperous, limitless, conscious, expansive, and orgasmic. Choose. But it's true.
I know, it's exactly our experience. Yeah, I'm with you, 100%. So what is, and this is what I'm really excited to hear, when you go, all right, this is my actualization. I am sovereign, this is it, and this is what I'm creating, and you're putting your energy and your attention into, I want to hear about history and some other things, we might come back to that, but what's the vision that you see for what's possible for you and for this place and this community and for humanity? What's the things that you're really excited about and you go, well, we can do this, we can create this, we could have this. What do you see?
I'm interested in taking ideas which would normally be written off as being insane or inane, and then defying all boundaries, definitions, prohibitions, and constrictions to be able to palpably prove that idea into existence. And I've got a fairly good record of going some way down that road.
Cool.
We've by no means succeeded at everything, fail at most things, happily so, and get up and dust ourselves down again, and keep walking the walk.
Yeah.
But I personally get off on that that articulated fuck you to the system or to the status quo. And
Science has proven this is impossible.
Yeah,
and
and
we
all of
know
that.
we can't,
Yeah.
and there's no way.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, which is why we've focused for years on this, enigmatic free energy story, and we've done it. We've nailed it absolutely in our own laboratories. We've raised lots of money. We've lost lots of money. We've had screaming matches. We've had death threats. We've had horrible parts of the journey and delirious parts of the journey over many years. And as you witnessed, or many hundreds and hundreds of people witnessed here just over a week ago. We demonstrated, 3 times over unity or thereabouts. In fact, this earlier today, we demonstrated 6 times over unity in our setup upstairs, which I'm happy to let you in on.
Cool.
And in our laboratory in Atlanta with our pioneering scientists, 20 times over unity. It's just not that complicated. How we develop the so-called free energy technology now into deliverable, replicable products is what we're focusing on. So we're doing intensive R&D, and we are continuing to raise financing in increments. We know exactly what we're doing. We have a very clear idea of the political strategy and the economic strategy. And as I mentioned into the live transmission the other night to many, many thousands of people, we've already begun the process of engaging governments, heads of state, finance ministers, and energy ministers. So woe betide any gooks and spooks who come, as jackals, get sent to destabilize our game. We've built a level of protection into what we're doing. No, we're not open sourcing it today. That would be absolute folly. What we did was a public demonstration, early demonstration. There will be more. And we will ultimately open source or get the technology into the mainframe, but it'll be in an articulated way.
Nice.
We'll announce more about that in about 2 weeks' time from now.
now I'm guessing you're not going to go to UK and USA, and they're not going to
No,
be your first
not
clients,
interested.
right?
I'm not interested. Besides which, I've already made it clear to the agents or representatives of powers that be who have contacted me and us over the years, certainly since I was Director General in the United Nations intergovernmental sector for renewable energies a few years ago, about 2010 I think it was. Since that time I've had engagement with agents of those special interests who will either shoot you dead or sit down and negotiate with you. And I have had a number of conversations with them. Yes, using code names and all that silly bugger stuff. But what I've learned in those engagements, those so-called, diplomatic engagements, is I've learned that there is the capacity to negotiate a given position. It's not them and us. And yes, it is them and us if you want to view the world in that binarized way. And if you can continuously insist on no dialogue, then you will ultimately probably end up stepping on a landmine or falling down the stairs. But if you're open to the conversation, which I've stipulated from day one, I said if anyone's got a problem with what me or our engineers or scientists are doing, contact me by email. Here's my email. Phone me. Come and see me. But don't send jackals in. That's a silly game, and they did that for many years. I mean, I was very friendly with Dr. Brian O'Leary, the Apollo astronaut scientist, who I loved to death. And Brian was the great pioneer who was monitoring the assassinations of scientists and doctors over many, many years, who were victims of the pernicious activities of elements within the military-industrial complex and the corporation. But through Brian, I learned a fair bit. My preferred methodology of dealing with the Babylonian priesthood is to broadcast from the center, to get up and walk out in the light of day and walk in a straight line and stand in the flame of pure truth insofar as one is able to and speak from the center and be open to any quantum dialogue with devils or with angels in that sense. That's just my approach. And I was equipped for that kind of a walk, and that's what I'm doing. And perhaps it's not unsurprising, or perhaps it's not coincidental that certain things are succeeding where we're going and the way that we've chosen to move. But the problem with engaging the way that I do or that we do within Humanitad and by extension New Earth and our Cutie Pie Corporation that we've set up and some of the other initiatives that we've set forth, the problem is that we're damned if we do and damned if we don't. Because we're holding this middle line between the status quo, the established order, and the new paradigm shift and the great new event horizon. So we're standing on the line between those two and acting as a kind of brokerage or rapprochement between the old paradigm and the new paradigm. And I chose years ago to do that. I wrote an album based on this concept of duende, of the indivisible line between the visible and the invisible. And we've chosen more or less to navigate as an organizationally, as a collective, that bizarre path.
Wow.
So we're trusted more or less by certain members of the intelligence community and by diplomats and governments, sectors within government, to some great extent.
Wow.
We're also entrusted by many members of the fringe and the New Age communities and the spiritual communities. So we are variously recognized by both sides, and so we act as arbiter in some cases, which is why most of what I do is elevate the voices of others. Is create initiatives or platforms upon which other institutions or individuals can shine and be heard. And we continue to do that with something called World Phoenix, which we're releasing later this year, which was forums and lectures and kind of, I guess, TED Talks on steroids kind of thing.
Unreal.
But facilitating earnest inquiry in pursuit of the expansion of individual and planetary consciousness.
Wow. I definitely relate to that. Resonates. I often feel like a bridge between mainstream where people are stuck and where people are free and going, come on over, right? So that middle line, I think it's a beautiful concept. I really appreciate that metaphor.
I'm not even saying come on over. I'm holding the line, believing as I do that the collective groundswell of the awakening of the collective human heart is on its own exponential curve towards so-called ascension. That is a natural, organic unfoldment. Right action will issue out of it as long as we hold that space and allow for it to do so. But so long as one of those valves is blocked and there's no communication between light and shade in that sense, and they're constantly sequestered in this kind of binarized, polarized, dualistic paradigm, that by definition is conflict. It's not synthesis. And so we're engaging in the process consciously of synthesis. And New Earth is that. And this NewEarth Haven here is an early expression of that synthesis. God knows there are ego trips flying around here. Mine is not the least of them. But it's an experiment. It's an honest social experiment. And it seeks service to others over service to self. And it demands that we place our attention on the elevation of art, beauty, and consciousness over devotion to time and money and fear.
This time, money, fear, there's such a, Brian just shared that with me a few weeks ago. And it just hit me and it's sat with me ever since. And went, wow, so many of us so bought into time, money, fear. This is, have we got time? Can I afford it? What's the,
Exactly. It's idolatry by any other name,
Big time.
or the worship of false light. And that's what our galactic sleep, at least the last 13,000 years of our semi-arc of the grand procession of the equinox, since the great deluge, occurred, and there was a reboot, by best accounts, of our planetary biosphere 13,000 years ago. In that long galactic sleep of 13,000 years, we have certainly maxed out on the exploration of the totemization of value of humans into money. Insane proposition, but there you have it. And the segregation of the dielectric universe of impossible, limitless potential into time. and calendric
little
systems,
bits.
which define a false and narrow corridor of attention of reality. So that's the time element, which is utterly false, utterly mutant, and totally out of sync with the harmonic resonance of sentience, of spirit, of consciousness in its purest form. And then, of course, the underpinning to that time and money, which are totems, two horns of the devil. The underpinning of that is the canvas of fear, of bloodletting, of blood economy, of scarcity, of entropy, of decay and death. All false. All of them are bad ideas made manifest through the collective meme machine. So civilizational programs, cultural programs, religious programs, social programs, intellectual programs, all of the above, constantly reinforcing the false light notions of time is real, and that money is value, and that fear is a healthy reflex because it keeps you safe. There you have it. But to erase and eradicate those three is just one pure, lucid determination. And that's the actualization trigger. And the moment you do that, money has no hold over you, and you will manifest it. It will manifest around you, provided you have you do not identify with it falsely. Time has no signature over you any longer. You start to self-govern your rhythms, your circadian rhythms, all of the meridia of your inner biosphere engage into a new pulse of reality. And that pulse of reality steps away from entropy and steps into vibrance, health and wellness and so on. And fear becomes anathema. It's moot. It can't exist where there is not a notion of time or money. How on earth could I be fearful in the now, looking at these beautiful faces around and these beautiful shapes and colors and the fractal energy forms coming off all of this natural order? How could I be in a fearful state? Fear is a manufactured toxin that maintains spiritual dysfunction. But once you have literally stepped out of that, it doesn't exist. So you can have a reflexive, the capacity to quickly zip out of the way of oncoming traffic. That's not fear. That's reflexivity, muscle memory. Time and motion is still part of the equation. But none of it governed by fear. So not waking up in the morning and making a decision based on fear, which most people do most of the time. Say, no, well, I'm not going to do that, and I'm not going to get on the plane and go to that because I don't know if I can afford it, and if I do, I don't think that's going to happen. You know, we can argue always 1,000 reasons why we should not do something, and
always be right.
Always be right, and constantly override what life is begging you to embrace, and say, just fall back.
Do it.
Fall back.
Yeah. Well, I think you've kind of let the cat out of the bag a little bit now with, I've had this a really beautiful relationship with this deep cycle of consciousness, this long cycle. And I get, kind of look at where we're at on it and go, this is happening anyway. I tell this story about my sister said humanity's not going to make it, and I'm going, well, are we going to make it? Are we going to not? And we're having this whole big facade with it, this big game with it. And the reality, and I'm going, we're going to make it, and we're going to pull together, we're going to save the world, we're going to do all this stuff. And the reality is, we're going to make it. We're on the upswing of the cycle, and I'm just surfing the wave, right? It was beautiful to hear you speak about that, and it's not something that I've really brought up with many other people.
I would suggest we've already made it.
Of course, of course we have. But a lot of people still, in that question, and that question really appeals to a lot of people. They're going, well, are we? Aren't we? Is it? Isn't it? And it's fun to kind of play with that and to be able to support people into having their own awakening, their own experience. Anyway, fantastic. I'd love to hear, and thank you so much for all that you've shared so much. I mean, it's really, what a trip, man. What a trip. I'd love to hear a little bit more really practically about some of the projects that you're involved in, some of the things that are on your heart to bring into the world, and what's cooking. We've got Cutie Pie, we've got Biopods, we've got NewEarth Haven here. What are the big projects that you're working on right now and you're super excited
simply
to
put,
manifest?
the bioarchitecture side of things, we've emphasized for 4 years how important that is. I've done
Yep.
a lot of speaking on that, only because in claiming sovereignty and then wanting to step into health and wellness, one really needs to start to reappraise one's notions of the built environment. So walking down little streets and right angles everywhere and corners that entrap psychic energy in every building that you sit in, sleep in, is highly toxic.
Sure.
And ultimately, that's part of the civilizational entropic complex, is the fact that we are building in a mutant way and without any understanding of the undulations of nature or the resonance of form and the hyperdimensional physics of reality and the spatial harmonics that are a necessary function of wellness. And the truth is that anyone who is living in a little rotund rondavel or cottage, in the country, surrounded by the fractality of nature and this effervescence of life-affirming fractality, you know how good that feels, which is why we're always escaping to the country, or we're escaping to the seaside, or to the cliff tops, or to the mountains, or to the forest. Why?
Probably a
it's
clue.
Because it's life-affirming, because it's quite literally putting life force back into us.
Good.
We go to city grids to do the job, and that's literally killing us, infusing us with life-depleting codes, heavy metals, and so on. So in taking full responsibility for your built environment and saying, well, I'm going to sleep in a place and a form that is bioresonant, that is feeding my so-called DNA, and DNA is a bit of a myth, but feeding my bioform, my molecular, cellular system with righteous codes, with flow forms at the etheric level that are feeding back in to life affirmation, and not psychically interposing with my organic sentience. That is an intelligent move to make for any of us. And so once you do it, and then you place yourself into that built environment, which is the bioresonant one, you see the immediate results, like literally within a day or two. Why go back? Wow. You won't ever go back. So this here is an invitation to people to key into bioresonance and bioarchitecture in a big way. And believe me, it's imperfect here. Sure. I mean, that road had nothing to do with me, and that road had nothing to do with me. So we've had to configure and conform to an existing disposition, which is not ideal. We're looking at other projects now which are completely sort of primeval landscapes in different parts of the world. In India, oh my God, you want to see what we're going to be doing in India, which hopefully we'll be in a position to announce that before the end of the year. Right. But we have some locations where we're beginning the master planning, and those locations are as off radar as you could possibly imagine. Wow. Awesome. And those spaces we're listening only to nature. And listening only to the telluric energies and to the meridia of the earth. And then our bioarchitects and master planners in West Africa, in Asia and elsewhere are beginning to work in coherence with the earth intelligence. So what emerges in the next 2 to 3 years of the New Earth project in that context, I believe, is unprecedented. And I know because I see it in my mind's eye. It's like I saw in my mind's eye what you see here with the Haven, and I saw it a couple of years ago. And now that's manifested and people are getting it. It's beautiful. We have thousands of people coming through here every month now because of this. And I'm seeing in my mind's eye, as are the architects and designers like Juan and Mike Rice and others that we're working with. We see and envision these bounteous spaces where thousands and thousands of people are living in sovereign and creative expression in places which is entirely conducive to health and wellness and consciousness. And they are on the brink of manifesting much bigger than this New Earth Haven. So let's revisit this conversation possibly in 2 years or 3 years from now, certainly with our West African and Indian objectives.
Fantastic. Yeah. So that's, I mean, essentially property development, but not property development as we would ever talk about property development.
I tell you where it's different.
Community development, regional. I mean, what do you?
Well, we've come under fire. Many trolls love to take catapult slings at me, obviously, and that's fair dinkum. But at my team for, oh, NewEarth is nothing but a property development, they're just selling real estate. Well, I'd love to know where we're selling it, because I can't find a website. What we're doing is putting offerings out there for people to plug into my home, actually, and my land, and participate. Some of it's my land, and I don't want to acquire anything. NewEarth doesn't seek to acquire anything.
Sure.
But what we are interested in doing is engendering conscious community.
Beautiful.
And so people who want to come and configure into this particular haven prospect, we've got 120, 150 prospects on offer here, where you can set up a dome or a home in this context or that context, work with the bioarchitecture modalities that we've created, which are in coherence with this haven, or the one in Sierra Leone or elsewhere. And those are offerings made to people who want to configure their lives into this unfoldment.
Wow.
But we don't have a company that's selling real estate.
Yeah, sure.
In fact, we don't want to own land. We're saying come and lease land off the rice farmer's family.
Yeah,
let the family work with you as service staff if that's what they want, and roll over the lease for 90 years. But don't try and buy. Let's get away from ownership. Let's get away from freehold. Leave the Balinese land in the title of the Balinese people. But enjoy a beautiful, prosperous, abundant, and creative life in the meantime, and one which doesn't cost much money.
Yeah.
But obviously, for now, we're in a transitional economy. We can't just build homes for people and give them away for nothing. I'd love to be able to do that. In my model of an economy, when I've got 40 engineers who present themselves and going, we're ready for service, and I've got 12 dentists and doctors saying, we're ready for service, and I've got 15 permaculture designers, then delegation is what we are pretty good at. Would be able to appoint and delegate people into creating a beautiful community in record time, given just a few resources.
Yeah.
But time, and the misperception of time and the cost of that misperception, is the big inhibitor still in manifesting these communities. So those people who followed the NewEarth experiment or initiative for the last few years know that in 2013 into 2014, I was talking up the fact that we had hundreds and hundreds of objectives around the world, which is true. We still do, on offer to the NewEarth. Thousands of square kilometers of land being offered, to the NewEarth nation. But what people don't get is that we were also saying at the time, but you people need to build the communities. It's not like we've set up a real estate group, we're going to go and build your community for you.
Sure.
Just because you give the land to us. That's not how this is going to work. You've got to step into the sovereign space, learn from the faculties, take the bioarchitecture and the blueprints which we offer to you, and then manifest those communities. Well, after 2 years, not many people had picked up and had the stamina or the wherewithal to be able to do that. And I got very frustrated about 18 months ago. I said, fuck it, we're going to do our own here. I'm going to stop going around talking and preaching how to do it, and we're going to set up the first experiment here. Why? Because it's my home. Yeah. And that land over there was lying fallow. So we just determined to set the first haven objective up and begin to qualify the theory in practice, and that's manifested to considerable success.
Wow. What's the opportunity for people to get involved who want to be part of a community, who want to live in structures that support life energetically, vibrationally? What's the opportunity for people to do that now?
Limitless possibility. I would just urge people not to come in with preconditions or prejudices, and not to come in any state of constriction. We've had so many people come in, they become beautifully inflamed by the beauty of what they see and what they feel, and then they come in and they want to completely purpose their lives into this unfoldment. But the problem is they've come in with preconceived ideas, and they haven't declared them at the front gate. And we've had people coming in trying to tear me off my throne. I mean, what the fuck? There is no throne, is there? I mean, if there is, I'd love to see it, because I would sell it. For instance.
Sure.
So people coming in with their own preconceptions or misconceptions, then falsely projecting that onto our team or onto me or onto the NewEarth Institute, that's a problem for us, because we put a lot of time, invest a lot of time, love and energy into coaching people, talking to people, having conversations and inviting people in. But when they're unresolved within themselves, those shadows tend to emerge rather quickly, in contrast to the light that we are definitely radiating as a movement. And then, of course, on the other hand, speaking of radiating light, we get, accused of being a cult and all sorts of crap. But this is a natural function of being a pioneer in anything.
Exactly.
You're going to get a lot of naysayers and detractors, and also some very brilliant people who have not necessarily manifested much in their own lives. And they tend to become quite inflamed. It's a sense of envy or jealousy, I don't know. But it's those kinds of colors also get thrown back at us.
Yep.
It's boring, but again, it's a natural function of pioneering.
And yeah, exactly. Just so you know, you're up to something good, right? You got to get some feedback both ways.
Yeah.
So who are some of the best people that really thrive here and that love it? Who are the people that that this is built for?
I built it for me.
Perfect.
Yeah, and I'm not going to try to build for anyone else ever. So every square inch of this house I built and conceived, and all the furniture, the mirror, everything here except for these brass statues and some of the things on the wall, pretty much designed and built from scratch to prove a point, to circle the square, to create a certain combustion of beauty and synthesis of beauty and resonance that feels very, very good.
Certainly does.
And enlightening. And that I proved that out some years ago in designing this place and building this place. And then I worked for some years with Juan Schlossa, our chief bioarchitect, who does all the bamboo work. And we defined that look and feel over there that you see with the with AKASHA. And that's very pioneering in a sense, because it's we're breaking a lot of rules in building that way, a lot. But does it work? Hell, yes, it works.
Does it ever?
And every line, I'm very tyrannical and fascistic about every single line needing to be in coherence, more or less, with any other intersecting line, whether it's a straight line or a curved line. Juan is deeply sensitive to that as well. So his bioarchitectural approach and my spatial harmonics, master architectural approach, seem to lock and load very well. Certainly they've worked here. Yeah. And in a lot of the templates that Juan has created, which are available online through the NewEarth University bioarchitecture faculty, you can see how he's taken bioarchitecture as an expressive form to the absolute max. Interpretations of bioarchitecture that work for the savannas in Africa, others that work for for the tropics. Well worth delving into that and checking out that faculty.
Wow. Yeah. Man, there is so much I still want to ask. So I want to hear about history. I want to hear about DNA you mentioned. I mean, there's a whole bunch of things. And at the same time, I'm feeling really complete. I really appreciate what we've shared, and there's been so much in this. Anything else that you'd love to share before we wrap up?
No, just love to speak to the DNA thing, because it is.
Let's hear it. Awesome.
It's an important element, and I'll be the first to confess that I only recently woke up to the confidence trick of DNA, and I think in very short time it'll be proven out that the sort of DNA/RNA meme was one which was articulated into the mainframe of science, biological science, in order to harness attention as a decoy into a whole language which was otherwise withholding us from placing our attention on the true quantum nature of our biotechnology. The fact that healing is a quantum phenomenon, it's instantaneous, and we can actualize, deactualize, manifest, demanifest using supernature. The fact that we become obsessive about DNA and coding and messaging and all of that was a decoy. Yep. So I have it on the highest authority, and I'm going to emphasize this again. I'm not using words. I have it on the highest authority in contemporaneous medical science that DNA RNA amounts to, and I will quote, less than 1% of the true nature of the human biotechnology. Wow. It's so negligible, one could almost forget about it altogether. And yet, it is the cornerstone of the popular science of biology.
Freaking awesome. In fact, as you say that, I can feel the truth of it. And
There you
it
go.
resonates immediately, and it's almost obvious when you say it out loud.
Yeah.
And I kind of go, it never occurred to me. I'd never considered that before because of the program that we've been run. It's genetics, and then we went epigenetics. Oh my goodness, over the DNA. Wow, what is that, right? And now you just, cool.
So move on.
That's really
Let's just
cool.
engage
Yeah,
the quantum
next.
at every level. Yeah.
Yeah, go straight there. I think that's a brilliant point to wrap up on. Sacha Stone, thank you so much for this time.
Great
I'm so
pleasure.
glad that we
Thank
get, and
you.
this energy and this words and this conversation. So grateful, and
Thank you
I'm sure so
very
many
much.
people are going to be enjoying this, and looking forward to catching up again to hear more.
Good, good.
Thanks so much. See you soon.
Thanks.